Clay is a massive fan of Quantum Leap, as we were just talking about. You must have been terrifically excited to see Dean Stockwell in this episode, acting alongside Captain Archer, reuniting a critically acclaimed sci-fi series from the early 90s that was running when TNG was. I'm super unfamiliar with Quantum Leap besides the idea of what's going on and knowing that these two are in it. It was nominated for a lot of awards against TNG, not against TNG, but in a way that Star Trek did not get award recognition. Quantum Leap was like, I'll be the sci-fi show that comes in and gets a lot of award recognition. He got nominated, I think Bakula was nominated for like an Emmy for like 4 of the 5 years, and same with Stockwell for it, which is like kind of strange. Yeah, it was apparently really well received. I only know the basic idea. I've seen maybe a handful of episodes of Quantum Leap, but not enough to know anything, and not enough for this episode to be saved by the fact that both of these guys are in it.
Yeah, I more or less the same. I am well aware of the concept. I've seen a few episodes here and there when I was younger. It is nice to see him in the episode. That is a nice little reunion. But Quantum Leap is one of those shows where, while lauded at the time, I wonder how many of those episodes are a little cringy. If you go back and look at them now, when you've got Scott Bakula like jumping into the bodies of like mentally challenged people and
women and stuff like that,
women and people of color and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder if they were meaning well and doing their best, but 30 years later, maybe it doesn't work as well as it did then.
It's it's a neat idea for a show at the very least.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I wonder how well it aged. I never thought of it as being that well regarded, but apparently with my slight research, it was pretty well regarded.
That kind of surprises me. I had never thought of it as like a critical dark. I just assumed it was just another sci-fi show.
And especially because I think it only ran, I say in quotes, but it only ran 5 seasons in the early 90s when shows just go until they basically like the showrunner dies or someone dies and it keeps going. So I thought it was not well received enough where they canceled it or something, but maybe just people weren't watching. Who knows? Fill us in, listeners, with your knowledge of Quantum Leap. Let's see here. So we're going to talk about Detained. Let's take a break. We'll play a quote from the episode and then we'll come back and break it down.
Where are we now?
This is a detention complex. It's several light years from where we found you.
Does everyone that violates your territory get thrown into a place like this?
We're at war with a species that can mimic the appearance of almost any humanoid. We had to make certain that you weren't infiltrators.
If you're worried we're Suliban, trust me, we're not.
I know. We've already tested your DNA. You're familiar with the Cabal?
Unfortunately.
Then you must know about their genetic enhancements and how dangerous they can be.
Firsthand.
I hope you didn't suffer too many casualties.
We've been lucky so far.
All right, so this is Detained. It's the 21st episode of the first season. First aired on the 24th of April, 2002. It is the third of 13 in the Temporal Cold War arc. Teleplay goes to Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong. Story credit goes to Rick Berman and Brandon Braga. Directed by David Livingston. In-universe date is 2152. In this episode, Archer and Mayweather accidentally enter a militarized zone and are detained by an alien race called the Tandarans, who are at war with the Suliban. Both men find themselves sharing cells with some Suliban detainees who believe they are wrongly imprisoned. And it's a Temporal Cold War arc, I suppose. I guess any episode with the Suliban is now going to be considered a Temporal Cold War. I don't know really where to start with this one. My general takeaway from this was like, I think this is a better episode than the past couple, like Rogue Planet and Oasis, that we've seen. However, I was far less interested in what was going on. It's just kind of a weird contrast where the other episodes had a better idea to it, maybe, that I was like more interested in what was going on, even while I admit that the script and everything had problems with Rogue Planet and Oasis and things. But this one, I don't think there's really a problem here, besides the fact that the script is boring. Like it's just kind of a boring episode to me. It takes a long time. It's in a very boring set. It's got boring scenes. It's got a boring race called the Suliban in it. It's got Dean Stockwell's character is pretty boring. And, maybe post 9/11, which they're obviously reacting to here, this maybe felt like something, but to me, it just feels like really stupid. It's just kind of a stupid episode. I think it's got hearts in it. Like it has it's well intentioned, but I think it's like to the point of being meaningless what they're talking about. Really, it's just and there's a lot of reasons that lead into that. But what would you think about it?
It has heart and also faith of that heart.
Yes.
I didn't hate this one, and I think it was mostly because I was watching it with the context of the time in mind. And it being so soon after September 11th and the heat against Islamic people and people from the Middle East getting so hot as people were gearing up to invade Afghanistan and stuff. It seemed in that context to be a fairly interesting episode to throw out there and very timely. But yeah, I think it's fairly hollow as far as that context goes, other than just sort of like mentioning it, because I don't have any understanding of who this Tandaran.
Tandaran.
I think it's
Tandarans.
Not Tandoori, like the food. I have no understanding of what the relationship between those two people are and how the Suliban have been damaging them, or like I just don't, they don't really give you a ton of context for it. It's just sort of like a fairly generic these people who are locked up don't actually deserve to be locked up kind of story.
We've only met the Suliban twice before.
Yeah,
this.
I don't even really know what they're about. Full stop. The Suliban.
I mean, I think that's
Except
kind
we
of
do this.
The thing that. And
sorry, people who are listening couldn't see that, but
they can do little melty actions. Yeah. But I think it seemed like almost like a leftover script from a Dominion War episode, because they start talking about them as being these shape-changing foes who are going to take over the galaxy. I was like, is this just did they just control F all of the all the
Dominion
founders
and shape changers but
did you recognize that the two Suliban in this actually played fairly prominent Vorta in DS9?
I forgot that, so I looked them up because one of them looked really familiar. The guy from the It TV movie that plays Eddie Kaspbrak, but I forgot until just now that he played a Vorta. But yes, I when I looked up the other guy, I saw Kevin. I was like, oh yeah, Kevin, he's a Vorta.
Yeah. Kevin from Rocks and Shoals, which is very good. He's probably my second favorite Vorta. And then the guy from The Search, which is a less important role, but he's in that one. I mean, this one feels like it's a better DS9 episode than it is an Enterprise episode, because for an Enterprise episode, I have a real hard time with how little we know about the Suliban and what you expect me to believe about them in this situation. So
right.
I've seen, before this episode came out, I was not even aware that there was a distinction between the Suliban, what do they call them, the Cabal, and just the regular Suliban. So that's the first kind of revelation. You're like, well, I guess it makes sense that not all aliens are like this, and like, but at the same time, Star Trek operates on the foundation of the races are kind of monocultures. That's what makes them work. And if it's not the case, then that kind of means something for the script.
Right.
And so the fact that we don't know the Suliban means that I don't really know what to feel about them here. And also, you'd think Archer would be a little bit more, have complicated feelings about them from the get-go, because whatever that other guy, Silic, saved the Enterprise from blowing up in the Cold Front episode.
Right.
And we talked about how confused that was, because Archer doesn't really seem to respond to the fact that Silic did that in that episode and saved their lives. He doesn't really talk about it with him or anything. But here, it just feels like they had to have this idea. The only race that they can really insert into it that we know anything about are the Suliban at this point. And it just feels too early in that group for me to really care about this. It's not like a DS9 thing where we're multiple seasons into knowing the Dominion, and then we have an episode where it turns out something about someone, and it kind of reverses everything they've learned over the past 50 episodes.
Yeah, and it's also tough too to put them and have them involved with some random new race that we've never heard of, because it gives us there's really no conflict over the situation. Because I think the interesting way to handle this would be for there to actually be some level of conflict on Archer's part as to not who's telling the truth, but not presenting Dean Stockwell's people as just straight up wrong.
Yeah.
Just because I think that's a more gray area, because that's the thing, right? That's the problem that people are having at this point in history,
right,
when this stuff is coming up. Is it's not that. It's like, yeah, sure, you can make a stance that, yeah, not everybody's a terrorist. Sure, obviously that's true, but that's not the problem. The problem is that too many people are thinking, well, they might be terrorists, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's like getting into that stuff is the much more narratively juicy and stuff to get into, and allows you to come out of it with a stronger point, stronger theme on the other end, as opposed to just sort of like not everybody's a bad guy. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, well,
I appreciate what they're doing, but I just don't think that they really did anything with it.
It runs into
like imagine if instead of the Tandarans it was like the Vulcans or something, where it was like a group that Archer has a reason to believe.
Right.
And so now he's caught in the position of, well, you know, it looks like what the Vulcans are doing here is bad.
Yeah. But
they are also my allies, and I don't really have a reason to not believe what they're saying is true. Yep. So then you get into the moral crisis that people are in when you're considering this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the other way that you have to strengthen this is that being like a moral message. This is what they call like the message show or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the writer of this episode actually says that he was sort of assigned this one, and that he generally hates message episodes, and he doesn't think that this episode is very good either. The problem with it,
continuing down our police metaphor.
Yeah.
If you have an episode with a message, but it's like one of those ones that's just limited to a single room, is that a message in a bottle episode?
It is. That's very good. Very excellent. Very good. We'll send out an SOS. We don't need it. We've got the material right here. No, I do like that. The problem with it, right, being a message show or a message in a bottle show, is that you're trying to condense, like, to feed off of your point of where you're saying, like, if you brought in the Vulcans and gave Archer a reason to believe them or something, like, or at least they would give him conflict because he would think that he knows what the Vulcans are up to. I think that the way that you do this more, like, the reason that this is hard right after 9/11 is that it's too reactive to things. So sure. The actual problem, I think, at this point in U.S. history is, yes, clearly not all Muslims and brown people are terrorists. However, there are terrorists who are Muslims and brown people who are driving planes into our buildings at this point, right? So there's this thing that you can't cover the whole group this way, and it's obviously wrong with like the Japanese internments and stuff like that. But at the same time, if you don't get a sense of what Colonel Grott is upset about, you don't get the sense that there's an imminent danger where he needs to do this kind of thing. And it sounds like this internment camp, I think the episode does kind of a disservice by, I get the sense that this camp has been functioning for a very long time at this point. So it's not even like you give him any reason or rationale to be having this thought process in him. So it comes across as the moral message is pure, but it's also uncomplicated to the point of being uninteresting, where, you know, where it's like you need something for this guy to do or something to give Archer a bit of conflict, because what it seems like to me coming in 20 years later, this is another episode of Archer goes in and makes a decision with very little information on his side.
Right.
And it's like, well, you don't know what these guys have been doing to them, Archer. Like, why
Right.
he pulls a Bane breaks Arkham Asylum down and lets everybody out of there. And it's only because he's talked to one of the, you just don't have enough information for him to understand that this is the right decision. And then before I throw it to you, bizarrely at the end, I feel like they try to have that character Grot say that, where he's like, they're all going to go back and join the Cabal. And Archer's like, well, maybe, but still, like, and then he flies off and looks sad.
Archer's like, I hadn't considered that.
So it feels like it's too little, too late for that, and it makes Archer look like a complete moron by the time that it's over when he's thinking about this as he's flying back to the ship.
Yeah, it's like, and this is not a one-to-one comparison. I'm not saying that the situation that he is presented with is identical to this, obviously, but it's like if Archer woke up in a maximum security prison on some planet, and then all of the people who they're convicted of murder were just like, hey man, I didn't kill anybody.
Right.
And Archer's like, you're right.
It's the Shawshank thing. No one's in there for any reason.
And again, obviously that's not the case. There's a point that they're making here. But it would be different if.
Well, imagine if it was Guantanamo. If he went to Guantanamo and he broke everyone out, you'd be like, well, there were some really horrible people in Guantanamo. I'm sure there are innocent people in Guantanamo too, which is terrible. They don't deserve to be there. But there are also people who have been killing, women, children, soldiers, and stuff that are like planting bombs. They're brought to Guantanamo. It was just a strange. Archer's decision is weird.
I think that the big difference is it's not a prison that he's in. That's the whole point. It's that it's not a prison for people who have done bad things. This is a pre-crime detainment camp, like they had in during World War II. So it's built into the concept that the people who are in here because they've done nothing wrong. They're just in here because of what they look like.
Yep.
And I think what would have actually been a more science fiction-y, and what I guess speculative is the word I'm looking for. A more speculative way to handle this is not, and sort of jumping off what you pointed out about how long it's been there, is not him showing up in the middle of this war or whatever that's happening with the Suliban and the Tandarans. I keep wanting to call them like the dollar store Bajorans because of their makeup. It's not to show up in the middle of that, but show up deep into, basically show up at this place long after the war has been over. So they're still doing this, and they're still throwing these people into this camp well after this perceived threat is eliminated. So then you get into the danger of these things and them being around so long that they become the way that people are treated all the time.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the more looking forward, looking ahead kind of thing. It's like, not only is it a horrible concept to begin with, but a lot of times once these things happen, it takes a lot to get them to shut down, just because that's the way that history ends up rolling out,
Yeah. And it's funny.
Or it's a danger. There is a danger of that happening.
It's also it's a little bit strange because it's a temporal Cold War, and the Suliban cabal or not have some kind of insight into the future of things here, right? So there's a level of sci-fi danger to them that the episode doesn't really sell at all, and it's just I think it's one of those things, like if you're going to have the temporal Cold War thing be a part of it and the Suliban be a part of it, the fear that this guy has could tie into your post-war continuing fear, because he's like, listen, we have information from the future from these guys that something is going to be happening this way. We're trying to prevent this from actually happening.
Yeah. You get into stuff like what ends up happening with like the Patriot Act, where you give the government a certain level of power that they should use during the time it's necessary, whether or not that's the right or wrong thing to do. And then all of a sudden they start coming up with reasons to keep that power. And then it becomes, when it comes to the temporal Cold War, though, it's so lame at this point, because
3 episodes in.
Yeah, because they have not really and I guess it's a matter of like teasing it out, but like I don't have any concept of what that even means.
No.
And I kind of wish they would get more stupid with it. So like I wish Dean Stockwell had been like, you have no idea what these people have done. Have they told you about the temporal Cold War? This guy over here tomorrow, 25 years ago, he's going to come in and kill the prime minister who's going to be born next week.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, what?
Precog stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's, and I think the thing that we're getting at, whether it's a precog thing or it's just a continuation of the Patriot Act, which they obviously don't know at this time because the Patriot Act doesn't even exist probably at this point when the episode was written. But there's no, the reason the episode can't have anything to say is because it's commenting on something that's right at the start of it.
Sure.
And it's like the tack that they're trying to take is that, hey, man, you know, it's not good to be racist. It's like, yeah, clearly, like, but the actual thing that you're playing off of is much more complicated than whether or not it's right to be sort of a, like, speciest, I suppose, in this point, or racist, if you want to call it that. It's, but the end result is just on the episode itself, I'm stuck with Archer and Mayweather stuck in a concrete set talking to oatmeal face people, and they're just going like, you know, it's not even anything interesting about, because you don't know anything about the Suliban, so you can't go off of it. It's just the guy's like, I've been here since my sister was taken away and I take care of my daughter. And you have a couple scenes with Stockwell, you go back, and then I always complain about it, but the action sequence at the end is actually the saving grace of the episode in a lot of ways for me, because I think it's competently done and it makes a lot of sense that that's how they rescue him, but I don't think it actually makes any sense or is the right thing for Archer to be doing at that point.
Yeah. Oh, and also the plot hinges on a let's make Malcolm Reed physically transform into a Suliban, which
He goes it's also Malcolm's worst mission, because he goes down there, everyone who sees him grabs him and slams him against the wall, and he gets hit with that taser thing, and then when he's like he's saving Archer, Archer's like, you go first, and he walks out the door and gets hit with the gun as the guy's coming. It's just a bad sequence of events for poor Reed, who doesn't, I'm not really sure why he has to go down there in the first place. Maybe just open the door, I suppose, but they could just beam Archer out if he can beam up. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess because they do establish that they can beam him out.
He beams down there.
Right. Yeah. And they apparently don't pick that up on their sensors this time. But yeah, I guess the point is that Archer doesn't want to be beamed out of there because he wants to help free these people and whatnot.
Sure. I don't even know if they mentioned that in the episode itself. I can't remember. Do they?
They do, because they send down the communicator. And then they're like, we have your position, we can beam you out. And he's like, no, don't do that. I got to make sure these people are safe first.
Gotcha.
See, paying attention this time.
You were. He doesn't have a reason why he can't just beam the Suliban out of there.
They don't cover that. I think there's probably too many. Although
I'm being a little bit silly. I think the transporter at this point only
you want to go down
time.
this road of fake technology. We're going to go down this road. No. Yeah, I found myself thinking during this episode, what would this episode be like if this was a TNG episode doing this? And I feel like in my head, I see the end being some sort of debate or argument of morals and ethics between Dean Stockwell and Picard. Like I don't feel like the TNG version of this ends with them flying down in a shuttlecraft and blowing up all the defenses of
shooting
this thing.
The prison.
Yeah, I feel like TNG would take a more philosophical tack. And obviously that's not the show that this is, because they do lean into the action more than they do that stuff. But yeah, it's just interesting to think about this, the way they handle this subject here versus the way they might have on a different show. Yeah,
well, I mean, I think that's maybe kind of a problem. If Enterprise leans into the action, the way that they can get out of a lot of philosophical conundrums is just to say, we're going to shoot our way out of this. And it's not really, that doesn't tie into what the episode is talking about up to that point, really.
I think this one, while not as egregiously bad in my point of view as Oasis, I think it suffers from kind of the same problem where they've got their kernel of an idea and they just play that card once and that's kind of it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like it comes down, they have like one conversation about whether or not these people belong to be here or deserve to be here. And they get that card on the table. And then after that, it's just sort of like, all right, well, we got to dick around until Malcolm comes down and then we got to blow the play. You know what I mean? It's like, It's not, there's no real exploration of this idea. It's just like Rick Berman handed you the card with the idea written on it. And then you just kind of have to build an episode around
40 minutes out of it. Yeah. I mean, that comes down to the simplicity of the more, like, you can't have the definition, at least in my opinion, the definition of a message show is that it can't be conflicted about what it is, which is why, in my opinion, maybe DS9 is not the show that's even capable of doing a message show on that series, because, well, I would argue they're all about messages, or the episodes are all about something, usually at least. The message show is kind of an after-school special take on something. Right. It's like, it's a very simplistic, like, this is why this is wrong. Here's a very clear example of why this is wrong. Now we're going to have our characters fix it by killing the people who wronged you. And I think that if you added a little bit of depth, like, even another way to take this is, imagine if all the Suliban in here were Cabal members, right? When they were arrested. Through their time in prison, they've reformed themselves. They've come to see the error of their ways in this time cop nonsense that's going on that they're a part of. And the problem is that the Dean Stockwell character can't admit that people can change. He's like, nope, once you're a Cabal member, you're always a Cabal member. You're going to stay in here forever. Then at least you have a little bit of room where Archer can talk about things like that with the Suliban and with Stockwell. But because it's so simple, Archer shows up, the Suliban say, we're not bad. Archer's like, oh, I'll go tell the guy. He goes, these people aren't bad. And he goes, yeah, they are. Get out of here. And Archer has to go back and sit there for another 20 minutes. And there's just nothing to, when you're so simplistic, there's nothing to talk about there.
Right. You know, I do think that would be a different episode, though, because I think the key to what they're trying to get at is that these people are wrongfully imprisoned. It's not that they have done stuff and are reformed. Right. It's that they are innocent bystanders who have been detained against their will. And I think I agree. That's the simplicity issue. It's like, clearly let them out. Like, there's no counter argument. You know, I was almost positive that Kevin was going to turn out to be working for the other guys. I thought he was going to be working with the Tandarans.
Yeah, Tandarans.
Because what I thought was he was so adamant that their plan to escape was too dangerous. And then, like, the next scene, you have Mayweather getting the shit kicked out of him, and then they all of a sudden know what the plan is. I was like, oh, obviously Kevin gave him up because he's weighing the safety of being behind these walls, even if it's unwarranted, versus the danger of getting out and then being thrust back into the world. That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting. And of course, they didn't do that though, because why? Why not? But I think there's things you can do inside this idea that would be really interesting. But yeah, they just chose
maintaining a these are purely good people who've been locked up angle.
Yes. Yeah. I think, and you say that Deep Space Nine wouldn't be the show to do an episode like this. I think you're right, but
a message show with such a pure, this guy is wrong, these people are okay.
Right. I think the way that they would handle this is an episode like either Duet or the one where Kira is being tortured by the guy, guy she tried to kill.
Yeah, darkness. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but taking those two elements and sort of spinning the approach of the viewpoint on them to see. Not only, this was the wrong thing to do, but why did they end up making that decision? Yeah, you're looking at it from the point of view of the oppressor, and you're hearing why they did that, what their point of view was, which is not right, but it gives you a more nuanced look at the cause of something like this and the result, and you've got it's just a lot more facets to it.
Right. And yeah, I think that's a good way for you can either complicate the reason that the people are in there, or you have to complicate the Grot Dean Stockwell role. Like you need one of those two to be a little bit more, because no one. It's a good reason. It's a good example using the Cardassians. Like no one would ever say that the Cardassians acted well in those situations, but at least there's like an interesting reason to examine why they were doing that, or how in Ducat's case, how he justifies it to himself that this was the thing that he had to do. And this episode doesn't have either of those things. And it's at that point, that's completely not interesting, because I think it's impossible to argue that anyone should feel bad or have sympathy for the Cardassians in DS9. But that series just did a much better job of, at least they felt like they had a kind of grounded approach to what they were doing, even though they're horribly wrong in what they actually did the whole time.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I feel like in this episode you get it's almost like you get a scene where Dean Stock was like, do you have any idea what these Suliban have done to my people? And then you go like, actually no, because you haven't really been specific. You've just that's sort of the most information you've given us, and we're supposed to take you on your word for it.
He should have dumped the entire records of what the Suliban did onto Paul, the way that she dumped her entire diary of events onto him.
Right.
That was
exactly. Yeah.
I like that scene just because I guess she's doing it to clutter the communications. They won't be able to detect them when they beam over or something. But I just like the image of Stockwell sitting at his desk, like typing one-handed on his laptop as he's like, yeah, there's too much data. Too much data coming in. I can't handle it.
Our signal's been jammed. It's strawberry. Yeah, that I like that scene. That was one where I wasn't sure if that was something T'Pol would really do. But she seemed to be channeling like movie era Spock in that scene, where he's just being very, very dry about being a dick to somebody.
Yeah.
By burying them in paperwork.
Yeah, I didn't mind that whole, the escape thing feels a little bit convoluted. The weirdest thing about the ending, not really the weirdest thing is Archer's turn there, where he like, do you think they all got out? He's like, I think they all got out. I don't know if they're okay though. Just stares at the camera.
I really should have thought this through.
You also don't see what happens to the two Suliban, Keevan and the other guy. Keevan goes back for him, but you never see that they get out or if they just die. If they die, I'm not sure it really means anything, really. I don't really understand Keevan's hesitancy to go back for him, really. Like, I kind of do, but I don't think that it's thematically important.
Yeah, he's just afraid.
Enough. Just afraid,
his thing is that this is too dangerous, so going back into a room to shoot his way out is not his ideal choice.
Just that you would have thought you'd see them, some shot of those two, either on a ship or on the planet's surface or something at the very end, but you don't really, you don't get any of that stuff. Anything else about this one? I don't know. I was just really bored.
I was kind of hoping Dean Stockwell's character was going to be named like Alzacat or something, so he could say like thanks Al on the way out, but he didn't.
No, they kept it fairly like I guess that's kind of like if you're going to have a show where you do this, wouldn't you if you get Stockwell in there, maybe this is the wrong order of operations, but if he agrees that he wants to come on and do this, wouldn't you be like, how about you guys write a Star Trek script that's a little bit like Quantum Leap? Like there's some kind of Quantum Leap idea here that we can play on. Sure. I just feel that that's obvious, and this doesn't feel at all like what you would do with that kind of stunt casting. Not stunt casting, but
they should have had Archer wake up in Suliban makeup, and then Dean Stockwell is like the human person there who has to help him get out. And he's like, but you don't understand. This isn't what I look like. Right. It's like, I know. That's not the problem. We got to get you out of here,
Or just Archer quantum leaps into Stockwell's body. So whenever he's walking around, he is Stockwell in that case. Something like that. I don't know. I guess that's it then. Let's just take a break. We'll play a quote from the episode, and then we'll come back and read some patron thoughts about Detained, and then give our final thoughts about Detained.
You had no right to interfere. This isn't about my rights. It's about theirs. They have no rights. They lost them the moment the Cabal began attacking us.
Do you know how many people the Cabal have murdered? How many ships they destroyed? Colonies? You just gave them 89 new soldiers!
What makes you think they'll join the Cabal?
These people have nothing left. They're desperate. They'll never be able to resist what the Cabal has to offer.
I haven't been here very long, but I seem to know these people a hell of a lot better than you do.
All right, everybody. So that's it. Thank you very much for supporting the show or listening to the show. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/thepensky-file. A couple dollars a month gets you extra stuff like extra podcasts. We talked about Paprika, the anime, the other day. I did a Star Trek commentary video for Sarek, so you can watch the episode with my voiceover on top of it. And we did some other things too recently, but you can go check it out. Patreon.com/thepensky-file. A couple dollars a month to support the show and get extra stuff. And as always, our Captain Tier supporters get a shout out, which is, again, this is going to be read in order of sign up. So the first person mentioned is the oldest. Special thank you goes to Christian Pouch, Tariq Latif, Chris Tinsley, Mike Burnett, Cardinal Doomsday, Joint Mango, Ben Douglas, Neil Brennan, Kyle Barrett, Samuel Custer, Matthew Ross, Nathan Elliott, Eric Johnson, Andrew Chirlog, Grim Santo, Matt Cutler, Tom Hiles, Dwayne Hackett, Sean, Jordan Cooper, Russell Elledge, Kevin Reyes, Vault 13 Hero, Stephen Minton, David Beardmore, Darth Mosk, HH28, Mad Courier 6, Jacob123, Matt Houston, Mike Harris, Nick Sergi, Jakey's Gamer, Patrick Seba, Captain Brazen, Kevin Lowry, Eric's Antoine, Bradley Killens, Corey Martin, Woodrow. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting the show. And you haven't been able to see this, Clay, but the light that we were talking about before is just going crazy for me. This my background light. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure it's annoying people. Hopefully not to give him too much of a strobe effect, but we'll see if we can figure that out. Anyway, let's go to patron thoughts about this.
And just to be clear, if you want to get your name read first, you have to be cunning enough to get everybody ahead of you to not be a patron anymore.
You have to be a Suliban time cop agent and go back and sign up.
That's the other option.
Make sure that it retroactively charges you appropriately, though. Just that's one of those banking errors you don't want to run into. I have to do a little bit of a delay here as I have to find the episodes. Detained. There it is. So, first patron comment goes to Matthew Ross. A Quantum Leap reunion, but no Ziggy or the catchphrase, oh boy, except when I exhaled my disappointment with the slow-paced, dour Japanese internment parable. In the meantime, why can't Archer just explore and not cause trouble considering how weak his ships are? They reveal that the Suliban are not all in the Cabal is so blah. Everything is tan and faded, as was my interest in the story. Why wouldn't Archer answer the Cabal's actions? He could have said something about he could have said everything up to the temporal Cold War. It's not that this was really top secret, and what would it have given his captors? Nothing. Their rescue seemed really chancy with the information dump and the assaulting another race's jail. Probably won't be a problem. I mean, why would that make another race mad? Good mask machine work on the Enterprise for Reed. Enterprise's shuttle seemed to be repaired and regenerated Voyager style. And luckily, there's no consequences for anything here. Nod knowingly and fade to black.
Yeah, I know. Like, how does this affect intergalactic relations with the Federation or Starfleet and the Tandarans, or you know what I mean? Like, they just assaulted a military base.
I think they, as he's saying, they do make them out to be kind of pathetic. Like the Enterprise is actually more advanced than they are. So I guess it's just one of those like just kick them off to the side and never think about it again type situations.
I do also think he brought up the analog for the Japanese internment camps. I think that is a big crutch for this episode as well, because since they bring that up specifically, that almost does the work of having to tell an interesting story, because then it's just like, oh, it's just like that. Right. Instead of presenting this as a situation and exploring the situation, they lean into being very literal about what the message is that they're telling you, which kind of hamstrings you as far as actually doing something interesting with it. Well,
it's actually funny that they do that, because it's two levels of being removed from details, right? So at the time that this is written, the Japanese internment camps are also kind of a faded moral message, right? Like, because so much time has passed that you just know the badness of the Japanese internment stuff, and so they're dealing with a situation that happened in World War II at that time when they were writing this, and the U.S. has been attacked by Japan and things. The whole world has gone to shit. And people make a, now in retrospect, terrible decision with what to do with these people who are in America at that point, right? So now 9/11 happens, and they write this. And it's another simplification of like they go back to this pure message about the Japanese internment thing and they insert it on top of something that they at the time they don't really understand where this is all going to go. So it just feels like the Japanese thing is a get out of jail. We don't actually need to have a story to explain this to you. Just like look at your history book here and see what it is. But at the same, it also doesn't add any nuance to the plot at all at that point again, because you're operating on, yes, the internment camps are bad. Therefore, the Suliban are good, I guess, is your case here.
Right.
Stephen Minton says, Detained, a simplistic episode with a very obvious social commentary. Does that make it bad? I don't know. As for the obviousness, the message that says we should not treat all members of a particular group the same just because individual members of that group wronged us is one that we have heard 1,000 times before, and yet we fail to listen again and again. Having family history on both sides of the conflict in WW2 Europe, I'm very well aware that it's worth repeating that message every once in a while. If it makes an impression on, say, one little kid watching Enterprise, then it's probably done its job. As for the simplicity, I'm not so sure. Archer is back to his meddling ways, and while his heart is obviously in the right place, I kept thinking that he hasn't really thought this one through. What about the repercussions of the Suliban and all those other internment camps? What about the risk of provoking a war between Earth and Tandar? Actions do have consequences, you know? I may be asking a bit much for 45 minutes of TV, but I am asking. 3 rejected requests for a transfer out of 5. Agreed. It just doesn't... Yeah. No, I think he's touched on all the points that we touched on. I don't really have anything to add to that.
I do. It is interesting looking at it from that standpoint of like, is this is a simplified version? Is that okay, given if like the people who are watching this are on the younger end? And,
children.
More important to I don't know how many kids are watching Enterprise, but I do agree with his point.
Yes, I think the age for that is younger than this. Like kids, I think kids who are probably watching Enterprise are probably old enough to handle a slightly more complicated situation that you've got going here. This is not 3-year-old or 4-year-old watching a Peppa Pig episode, which is like incredibly just follow point A to point B. Don't get confused along the way.
Right.
A Latte Librarian says, Detained, a bit ham-handed, and also Peppa Pig is not aimed at adults, where Enterprise is trying to cater to some kind of adult contingency who's watching it. Yeah. A Latte Librarian says, Detained, a bit ham-handed, but given the year this aired, the message seems appropriate. Can't help but wonder if Starfleet would consider this good or bad first contact. 3 jailbreaks out of 5. It's a good point. Captain Brazen says, Detained, Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula rejoined for a tongue-in-cheek Quantum Leap reunion. Stockwell looks a lot like Al holding that pad, or maybe he's just a Cylon skin job. Honestly, you guys got to do Battlestar Galactica at some point. Anyway, Archer is just so damn curious about learning new people. He just keeps getting himself and his crew, this time Mayweather, into trouble. What a rascal. Seriously, what would happen to all those Suliban and the other internment camps? They could potentially suffer more after Archer's good-hearted, well-intentioned jailbreak. Oh boy. The simplistic storytelling of this message show can feel ham-fisted and at best preachy with the subject. However, watching this episode with my family brought up a natural discussion of WW2 internment camps and reflecting on our history. If we don't remember and reflect on our history, we're destined doomed to repeat it. Any episode that can do this is a valued one in my book. Also, is Mayweather's brief conversation regarding prejudice the best use of the character up to this point? 3 Ziggy references out of 5.
See, I feel like that sort of is what I'm talking about when I think about how TNG would handle this. I feel like ultimately Picard would end up in the situation where he realizes that any aggressive action towards this camp would ultimately cause more hurt towards other people who are, you know what I mean? Like there'd be that level of consequences would be more in his mind than it is in Archer's mind.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he wouldn't do anything about it, but I think that would be something he considers.
Yeah. It's, I guess I feel like I feel like this is the stupid fucking light behind me. I feel like there's a I feel like this is an episode where I think that people are going to take what I'm saying out of context. So I wonder if I need to clarify. So
hold on, let me get you a shovel.
I don't really see what's served by such a simplistic moral story, because it's too clear cut here. That's like there's almost so little conflict to this story that it's not a story on some level, because it's like, well, yeah, the Suliban are wrongly imprisoned here, and this is what we're going to do. I think that like what Captain Brazen was saying here, it brings up a discussion of WW2's internment camps and reflecting on our history. But what I think that it's doing is that reflecting on that history is not reflecting in a way that is thoughtfully thought-provoking about why that happened in the first place. Like, so just to look back on a historical event and go, that was a terrible thing, is not, I'm not saying Captain Brazen's doing this, but I'm saying this episode is doing this, is like to look back at that and go, yeah, that was bad. Let's not even think about why that was bad, or like why that happened in the first place. Let's just go along with this is bad and we'll never do it again. And well, that's obviously a good outcome. It's not really thoughtful about what that means for the next time it happens. Like, how do you improve on this situation that's going to come up again, which is what Archer's trying to do here. Archer's not improving on the Japanese internment camp situation. He's not adding anything to that, or he's not illuminating anything about that story, which I think is the big problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's fine to acknowledge it, but it's more important to understand the signs that lead up to getting to that point, so you can then avoid doing it again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Essentially. Yeah. Nick Sergey says, Detained. I like this one. It's amazing how this style of Trek, the Berman era, can really ratchet up the tension without going bigger in the budget. It's all in the writing. As far as the new races made for just this series, the Suliban are fine. It's not the greatest episode, but I like it well enough. Christian Pouch says, Archer learns that not all Suliban are bad. Moral lesson, all caps. That said, it's interesting to explore a bit more about the Suliban, and I enjoy the ideas that are being thrown around. I think it could have been explored more. It's a pity that it won't be. Karate is fine, but there's not a whole lot of depth to the arguments going on here. One problem, while I like the uncertain ending, I think it might undercut the message by implying that those Suliban might in fact join the Cabal because of their treatment, something which never happened in the explicit parallel to the Japanese internment camps. It's quite the opposite, as many Japanese Americans fought heroically for the U.S. after their imprisonment. If it takes a little bit of abuse to make the Suliban join the Cabal, maybe they should be. If all it takes is a little bit of abuse to make the Suliban join the Cabal, maybe they should be worried. Final note, the actors for the Vorta, Kevin and Borath played the two lead Sulibans here.
I think what's missing from this story is either Archer or Mayweather should be prejudiced against the Suliban in some way. Mm-hmm. Because they are both so righteous.
Mayweather has no reason to be in this episode, really.
Yeah, he's just sort of there.
He's just there.
Yeah. But yeah, they need the O'Brien character, you know, who has the caustic attitude, who then changes his attitude through the actions of the story. Yeah. Instead of just going in like Archer, fairly self-righteous, and then just being reaffirmed in his self-righteousness by being right.
Right.
You know, so I think that's what's missing is there's so much stuff you could do with this concept and still preserve the message that you're trying to get across.
Yeah.
It's just a shame.
And that's a good point about O'Brien. I think it's is it Hippocratic Oath? It might be Hippocratic Oath. It's the one where Bashir and O'Brien get stuck on the planet where they find the sick Jem'Hadar who are running out of Ketracel White. Yeah. And O'Brien, I think O'Brien is better written in that because he has I'm not going to help the Jem'Hadar attitude, but it's like the Cardassians. It just feels like you understand his point of view as to why he's doing this. He's like, these guys are going to kill us. Like, I don't want to help them. If they're going to kill us, let them die first. And Bashir has the quote unquote more Star Trek or like upright moral outlook. But at the same time, he seems slightly naive, too, at that point because of what O'Brien's saying to him. And this show is lacking that conflict between the two of them, unfortunately. Mayweather, continuing the Mayweather characterization, he doesn't really have a personality. He's only down there to provide Archer someone to talk to, and he doesn't add anything to the situation. Yeah,
I know this is going to sound harsh, but the way that they handle this message, while the message is fine, it's like that scene in American Psycho when they're at dinner at the beginning and Patrick Bateman just lists off a whole bunch of stuff that they need to do. Like, it's like, we need to need to end apartheid and promote a culture of less materialism. And everyone's like, yeah, oh my God, that's so great. And that's how it feels, where it's like they're not saying anything real. Like the thing they're saying does matter and is right, but they're just saying it. They're not really. They're not giving you they're not backing it up really with anything, and they're not making you think about why that is the case. It's just sort of like, yeah, this is the way it is.
It's sort of the writers patting themselves on the back for thinking this way.
Yeah.
Without really being interesting about why you think that way. Kyle Barrett says, Detained, this isn't the most subtle episode ever produced, but it's surprisingly effective. While there are markers of the time the show was produced in present, the internment camp storyline sadly always seems timely and gets a solid retelling here. Archer even learned something, which is nice. The only significant issue is the ending. The episode is frustratingly lacking the final exclamation mark on the point it was making, instead opting for a stock action beat. And if the episode is implying that the saved Suliban will join the Cabal, then I don't know how I feel about that. An ending that actually discusses the impact of Archer's actions on both the freed Suliban and those still imprisoned would have been better than that very fast turn from Archer's simplistic mindset to the sudden ominous feel of the final few seconds we received. But because I'm in a generous mood, I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
See, I didn't read that last moment as him realizing, oh, maybe they might join the Cabal. I read it more as these innocent people are clearly caught in the middle.
Oh, I think Kyle's talking about the same thing I'm talking about, which is the final Brat or whatever that guy's name is. Oh, I
see. Okay.
The Dean Stockwell, where he's like, you idiot, they're all going to join the, like that sequence feels like Stockwell's saying that just because that's supposed to be the writers giving a reason as to why Archer maybe should have been conflicted about this the whole way through, and it just comes too little too late, I think.
Oh, no, well, I didn't necessarily read it that way. It seemed to me like they were last minute, that isn't that more or less the idea throughout. Like, it doesn't seem that revelatory that he all of a sudden is being like, oh, these guys are going to be bad guys if you it didn't. I don't know. It just didn't.
Does he talk about that before? I don't remember him being so explicitly, this is what you've done kind of a thing. Maybe he has, and I missed it, but I didn't.
Well, I mean, what else are they in there for other than being potential terrorists?
That's true. That's true. I read it that way. Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's the performance then, because Archer's performance his final expression isn't one of, to me, I hope those people are going to be okay on their ships out there. Mm-hmm. Like, where I see it more of like he seems more like profoundly shaken by it. I don't know. It might just be a performance type thing, but I kind of, it was both Kyle and I think Christian had mentioned the same thing. That's how I felt while watching it, which is interesting.
Yeah. The last scene with Stockwell, I saw it less as it giving a reason for Archer to be conflicted and more just a last ditch bad guy thing from Stockwell's character. Because he doesn't really, I didn't see him as saying anything that he clearly wasn't already thinking and wasn't already present. But I could be wrong.
Maybe I'm just trying to desperately insert better motivation onto that character at that point and be like, well, he should have had a better point the whole way through.
Well, even there, that would be kind of interesting too if they had talked about that before, where he's like, honestly, I don't believe these people did anything, but they've been in prison so long that if I were to let them out now, they almost surely would join up. I'm serious.
I know. Yeah. He's like
a ridiculous standpoint to have, but I mean,
but
like,
it makes sense.
Yeah. It's of one who is sort of in a Gul Dukat-esque role to be like, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is the way things have going. I don't believe this to be the case, but at this point, who's to say what they do in retaliation if we let them out now, which is equally as offensive as putting them in there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Benjamin Espinosa says, a nice allegory story about Manzanar and more relative to current events with the show aired Guantanamo. The Suliban are stand-ins here for the American Muslims or the American Japanese. Archer's good nature and morality are on display as he tries to help the Suliban escape rather than leave them to fend for themselves. Nice Mayweather moments also. I love seeing Reed as the Suliban. T'Pol and Trip on the bridge worked really well together and they had some great moments. The script worked well and didn't drag when it could have. I appreciated that Archer did not harm the administrator when he got the upper hand. He upheld Starfleet's ideals. In Disco or Picard, I'm sure they would have been murdered. 3 out of 5. He does. He raises that flashlight or whatever, like he's really gonna crack him across the face with it, but he decides not to.
He would have kicked him down a hole and then 80 yard off screen. This is for Ichiban, whatever his name is.
Eric Sanchuan says, "Oh, goody! The stars of my favorite show reunited at last."
I did not. I would like to say I did not mean that to be a Japanese joke. I just forgot the guy's. I forgot the guy's name. What the hell's his name?
Ichab.
The eye guy. Ichab. There we go. I was not making an insensitive joke. I apologize for that.
In a perfectly pedestrian prison break, they're reunited at last in a perfectly pedestrian prison break thing that I honestly can't be bothered to give one shit about, let alone 2. Okay, I'm being mean, but considering what this could have been, I don't know that Bakula and Stockwell just glaring at each other for 45 minutes is the optimum use of these two. As actors, off-screen friends in a sci-fi setting. And even putting all that aside, I guess I'm kind of miffed that Stockwell is the big bad of the episode and we're supposed to give a shit, but he spends most of his screen time sitting behind his desk. All that aside, I guess if this was just a sci-fi action piece guest starring Joe Blow from Kokomo, it wouldn't bother me so much because it's competent enough to pass the time. I guess if this were 2002, I'd be tremendously moved by the Guantanamo allegory and whatnot, but now, well, I've seen Zero Dark 30, so Bupkis. Anyway,
sorry.
Want me to finish this, or you want to go now?
Yeah, you can go.
Anyway, I may not be holding my head in my hands and weeping, but I do appreciate the attempt to give more layers to the proceedings with the Suliban are people too message. I appreciate character depth and dimensions, even if I don't give a flying fuck about the temporal Cold War, and neither do you. Don't say you do, because you're lying. It's nice that they give the sidekick role to Mayweather this time, I guess, even though he continues to be as interesting as a bowl of cold oatmeal. But at least it's not Tucker, who, sorry, will still take another season and a half to grow on me. So it is what it is. Some well stage action, a couple of decent moments with the mopey Suliban cellmates, and that's it.
So you said at the beginning that this feels like a very reactionary type story. And I wonder if I think it might be a little bit easier for us to critique it for not going far enough now, where if you think about when it came out, it's a reactionary, shallow isn't the right word, but kind of shallow. It's a shallow reactionary take to shallow reactionary takes. You know what I mean? It's like it's an equal forces meeting each other on each side of the spectrum.
It has no hindsight. It has no ability to recognize what's going to happen from what it's saying.
Exactly. Yes. So on the one hand, would it have cut through more because of that? Like, you know what I mean? Would it the simplicity of it and the strength of what it's trying to say cut through more because it is fairly reactionary in the face of other reactionary reactions, or is it still objectively, for lack of a better term, hampered by the fact that it doesn't actually get into any of the discussions? It's just very much like a poster someone holds up at a rally.
I mean, it might just not know what it's talking about. Like at the time you're operating with such limited sort of understanding of how things are going to play out.
Sure.
Like, I wonder how much did Guantanamo even exist at this point? I don't know. But probably not.
I don't think in the way that we are used to at this point. No.
Yeah. But my timeline about what's going on there, but is there any way that this is like, I have a hard time believing that this is an episode about Japanese internment camps when it seems this is a 9/11 allegory that they're using the Japanese internment camps for. So if that's the case, it does feel reactionary, probably. It's just if you think that your show is going to be reactionary in that sense, maybe here's the better way to say this. If this episode, if you wanted to cover themes like this, I don't think it should have been so on the nose as to what it's referencing. You know, like you can do a Japanese internment camp episode, which is not, we have some Suliban in an internment camp who don't belong here kind of thing. Like you can play with the ideas of the, what's in the zeitgeist at that time. But this just feels too much like you're referencing pulled from the headlines events that are going on, and you don't have anything to say about them outside of the usual, like, don't be racist, which seems obvious.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people would argue that don't be racist is not an obvious thing to say at this point, but I feel like you have to say something more interesting than this. Like you're never, I always bring it to the, if it's a message episode, we always, because I work in a corporate setting, we always have, these like PR mandatory meeting things that are like diversity and discrimination seminars, they call them, whatever. It's like a 20-minute PowerPoint about how racism is bad. I just look at it and it's just like, who does this convince? Does the 50-year-old racist go to this event and is like, you know what? This PowerPoint presentation has really changed my mind because you gave me such an insightful take. I feel the same about this. It's like it's a message episode, but you're only preaching to the choir. No one who has any kind of thought about this is ever going to be persuaded by this.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
And you can argue either way for it. Like if you wanted to take an episode in one direction or you wanted to go another, but at least give me something to think about as opposed to just having me sit here and watch the facts sort of pour down the screen.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
I think this is the last comment. Detained. Yeah. Woodrow says, the cause was compelling, Shuttlepod 2 dispensing to action was exciting, and T'Pol made a great captain, except when sitting uncomfortably in that gigantic captain's chair. The low point for the episode was its lack of surprise. Archer was far too comfortable in prison, and Shuttlepod 2 managed to incinerate the guards in the battlements without any damage. Some crossfire would have gone a long way towards heightening that suspense. 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, people got killed, too.
Yeah.
You know,
I assume those bombs blew up those security guards who were tricked into going towards the end.
It looked like it.
They also they made them earn it because they slapped around Reed before that, or not Reed. They slapped around Mayweather. So you guys just desserts.
And they never had like any sort of follow up because the one the guy who's not Kevin, the Eddie from It. Was tells that story about being friends with the brother of the guard and they grew up together or something. They never really even do anything with that.
Oh yeah.
Like there's no touch. They don't touch back on that at the end or anything. And that guy just gets blown up. And then there's Archer is not he's got some interesting questions he's got to ask himself after this one. Just as far as not so much as his intentions, but maybe his execution methods.
Just
need
his
a little work.
Vaguely, like not really, but like vaguely Punisher-esque from the comic books. Like it's kind of a like, I'm going to fix this my way, and it's like, well, I don't know if that was the best way to go about this. I understand what you did here, but I don't know if this is really stopping this.
Like there could be room for T'Pol to be like, you know, I understand what you did here, and you may have done the right thing, but with all the destruction and 5 of the Tandarans being killed, there's a good chance that they could use this as an excuse to come down even harder on the Silurians.
Right. Yep.
And have him be like, oh, oops.
Off to our next. We're blasting off again.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. Yeah, it's what are you going to give this one? Thank you, patrons, first and foremost, for your comments and supporting the show. And Clay, what are you going to give this?
I'm not going to give this one a high 3, actually, because I think it's I found it, like I said, I found it engaging based entirely on hindsight context.
Yeah.
But I do find the story that they're trying to tell a better attempt than, say, what they did in Oasis or Rogue Planet or something like that. It seems like they, for better or worse, their intentions were a lot more solidified. So yeah, it's still pretty boring. It's still pretty run of the mill, but I don't think it's terrible.
I'm going to give it a 3 as well. It's a better episode than those other two, Oasis and Rogue Planet. It's written better. I think the things make more sense within the context of the episode than those. I find it much more boring than those two. And
totally fair.
It's just I just wanted I wanted it to be about something, really. Like, it is about something. I wanted it to do a better job of examining what it was about, and I don't know that it really did that.
Yeah, I actually find this less boring than Oasis. I thought Oasis was a log until they just get to that end point. It's just like, fine. This one at least puts its message up front. Like, the thing it's about is up front, so you can kind of have it in your mind while you're watching it instead of just waiting for someone to get to the punchline. That's not really satisfying.
It does. It's just Oasis. I guess what kept me going for Oasis is it did have that terrible mystery to it, where there's not really a mystery here. And the mystery makes you think something's going to come from it, but it doesn't. Like, I don't know if this one would have been, there's no way you can really disguise this one as a mystery, but I don't know. I'm not pro that mystery storytelling, but at the same time, if you have a similar story and you don't have a mystery to it, it feels like this one to me. And I don't know if that's really what I'm interested in either.
That's really interesting to me, because I found Oasis boring because I thought the mystery was boring.
Yeah.
And not engaging. So it's interesting that the kernel of a concept and the potential to maybe explore that concept, I find a lot more interesting than, I wonder what's going on. Mm-hmm. That's interesting to compare those two viewpoints. That's funny.
I think we're done with this one. Thank you, patrons, for supporting us. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll be back with the next episode. Did I give it a score? I gave it a 3, right? We both gave it 3s, so that's it. Mm-hmm. And we'll be back with the next episode, which is boom. Let me click the little button here. Vox Sola, that's actually funny. So I didn't want to say this up front, lest it color my opinion of the episode. I watched Detained last night, and I fell asleep 20 minutes into it. And I woke up, and I was like, all right, good. I don't want to rewatch that. So I'm just going to try to catch up from where I am. I can't be far into it. And I'm watching it going, this is something, like, I'm going to have to rewatch. This is totally, like, I don't know how they got to this point. I was halfway into the next episode of Enterprise on the Netflix scale. And it took me a good 5 minutes to realize that I was not looking at the same thing.
Oh, I wish you hadn't realized it. That would have been amazing. It would have been a great conversation.
So needless to say, I had to rewatch the first half of Detained this morning and finish it off. But Vox Sola is our next one.
Did that happen once? Did I watch the wrong episode once and not realize it till like 10 minutes into the conversation?
You did. I mean, Sean didn't watch the right episode at some point. It was like totally off.
That's right.
I fell asleep during Real Ripe during the like pinnacle scene of Fences where
that's right.
And then I was questioning why all this stuff was happening afterwards.
Yeah, I didn't really see much of a point to this movie. It's like, well, you kind of were asleep for the 15 minutes where they kind of laid it out for you.
Where Viola Davis just yells at him for 10 minutes. I completely fell asleep during that part. Mm-hmm. That's it. Vox Soul is the next episode. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
We got Real Ripe, not Real Ripe, Rotten Horror Picture Show next week. I think I don't know where I am
on Wednesday.
Batman was this week, so
yeah.
Next week will be Rotten Horror. So we got
Tuesday. Excuse me.
Tuesday. So we've got Girl Walks Home Alone at Night coming out this week, which is an interesting one. Have you seen that one?
Mm-mm.
It's interesting. It's a very art housey, black and white Iranian vampire movie.
No,
that it's got a lot of style. I didn't love it, but it's got a lot of style to it, enough to keep you interested, I think.
It was shot in Iran? Or is it?
No, it was actually shot in California, but everybody in it is
Iranian.
Is Iranian, speaks.
Is it supposed to be in California, or is it supposed to be? They speak. What would they speak? They'd speak.
Showing our ignorance here.
It's not Parsi or something. Is
I'm not totally sure.
I'm gonna have to look this up just so that people can. So language in.
But it's supposed to take place in Iran, but they shot it in California.
Persian. I was just getting fancy with Persia. It's 50%
I was
Persian.
going to say that, but I didn't know if that was like me saying Oriental at this point, which obviously I don't do. But it was one of those things was like, I don't know if this is the right word. I don't want to do this.
Persian, Turk, and Kurdish are the top 3 languages in Iran.
Ah, interesting.
But is the movie supposed to be set in Iran?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's shot in California.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting movie.
So that'll be out on Tuesday. Badass continues as normal. That'll be the week after that. And then Star Trek Voxola will be out on Thursday after this episode. I guess that's it. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. Hope you enjoyed Detained. And we'll be back with the next episode. See ya.